The storm clouds rolled over the Wyoming hills like an army of angry spirits, the first drops of rain pelting the lone-covered wagon just as Delilah Rawlings realized she had been abandoned. Her pale fingers clutched the tear-stained letter, the final heartless goodbye from a man who had promised her the world but delivered only heartbreak. Wyoming Territory, 1879. A time when promises were supposed to mean something. The 22-year-old bride sat shivering on the wooden wagon seat, her wedding dress now muddy at the hem, her auburn hair coming loose from its careful arrangement. 600 miles from her Pennsylvania home, Delilah had traveled to meet and marry Thomas Wellington, a man she'd corresponded with for nearly a year. A man who had apparently changed his mind upon learning her father's business had failed, leaving her without the dowry he'd expected. "Cruel, faithless man," she whispered, her words disappearing into the howling wind as the rain began to fall in earnest. Her trunk of belongings sat beside her, all she had left in the world. The station master in Laramie had arranged for a local farmer to drive her to the Wellington ranch, but upon delivering Thomas's letter, the farmer had hastily deposited her belongings and departed, unwilling to be involved in such an uncomfortable situation. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape. The nearest town was miles back, the Wellington ranch still hours ahead, and the wagon she sat in belonged to neither. Delilah was truly alone, caught between two destinations belonging to neither. The rain came harder now, soaking through her thin coat and wedding dress. Pride had kept her tears at bay during the farmer's hasty departure, but now, with no one to witness her despair, Delilah's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. The wagon offered little shelter as the storm intensified. She didn't hear the approaching horse over the sound of rain and thunder, only becoming aware of another presence when the downpour suddenly stopped beating against her shoulders. Looking up, Delilah found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weather-beaten face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Madam," the stranger said, his deep voice gentle as he held his oilskin coat over her, "appears you could use some assistance." Water streamed from the brim of his hat as he stood there getting drenched, concerned only with keeping her dry. Delilah's voice caught in her throat. "I seem to have been left in rather unfortunate circumstances." The tall cowboy glanced at her wedding dress, the letter clutched in her hand, and her solitary trunk. His expression hardened briefly before softening again. "Name's Vaughn Xavier," he said, removing his hat with his free hand in a gesture of respect. "Foreman at the Triple Creek Ranch. And I don't make a habit of leaving ladies alone in storms." Before Delilah could respond, Vaughn had efficiently secured his coat around her shoulders. The warmth of it, both from the waterproof material and the lingering heat from his body, sent a shiver of relief through her chilled frame. "I can't take your coat," she protested weakly. "You already have," he replied with the hint of a smile, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to get you somewhere dry before this storm gets worse." Without waiting for permission, he began securing her trunk to his horse. "Can you ride?" he asked, glancing back at her. Delilah nodded, though in truth her experience was limited to the occasional gentle mare at her aunt's country estate. "But what about the wagon?" "Belongs to Ed Harker," Vaughn said, eyeing the vehicle. "I'll send someone back for it tomorrow. Right now you're more important than a wagon." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or expectation, warmed something in Delilah's chest that had nothing to do with the coat around her shoulders. With efficient movements, Vaughn helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. One strong arm circled her waist to keep her secure while his other hand took the reins. Delilah felt the solid wall of his chest against her back, his breath warm near her ear as he spoke. "Triple Creek's about 4 miles from here. We'll have you dry and warm in no time, miss." "Rawlings," she supplied. "Delilah Rawlings. Not Wellington?" he asked quietly, and she knew he'd guessed the nature of her predicament. No, she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. Not Wellington. They rode in silence after that, the rain continuing its assault as Vaughn guided the horse along a trail Delilah could barely discern. She found herself relaxing against him, exhaustion, and the steady rhythm of the horse threatening to lull her to sleep despite the storm. "Stay with me, Miss Rawlings," Vaughn said when her head nodded forward. "Almost there now." Triple Creek Ranch appeared through the rain as a collection of solid buildings nestled in a valley with a large main house at its center. Lights glowed from several windows, and Delilah had never seen anything so welcoming in her life. As they approached, a woman rushed out onto the covered porch, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Vaughn Xavier?" What in heaven's name? The woman stopped short when she saw Delilah. "Oh, good Lord. Bring her inside, quickly." Within moments, Delilah found herself ushered into a warm kitchen, Vaughn's coat removed and replaced with a thick quilt, while the older woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Hennessy, the housekeeper, fussed about making tea and stoking the fire. "Found her stranded about 4 miles out," Vaughn explained, removing his hat and running a hand through his wet hair. "Appears Mr. Thomas Wellington isn't the man of honor we took him for." Mrs. Hennessy's face darkened. "That scoundrel." "When Mr. Xavier Sr. hears about this, father's in Cheyenne until next week," Vaughn interrupted. "And I'd prefer Miss Rawlings tell her own story when she's ready." He turned to Delilah with a respectful nod. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, Miss Rawlings. Triple Creek has plenty of room and Mrs. Hennessy could use the company." "I couldn't impose," Delilah began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Hennessy interrupted, placing a steaming cup of tea before her. "It's no imposition. This place could use a young woman's touch, and I've been telling Mr. Xavier for years he needs to hire more help in the house." Delilah's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. "You're very kind, but I have no money to pay for lodging. I was counting on—" She stopped, embarrassed. "You were counting on a man who didn't deserve your trust," Vaughn said, his voice gentle but firm. "That's not your failing, Miss Rawlings. It's his." A lump formed in Delilah's throat at the simple declaration. This stranger had done more to restore her dignity in one sentence than she'd managed in hours of self-recrimination. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," she whispered. "Vaughn," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Xavier is my father." "Then I insist you call me Delilah," she replied. "If you'll excuse me, Delilah," he said, the sound of her name in his deep voice sending an unexpected warmth through her. "I need to see to the horses and get into dry clothes. Mrs. Hennessy will show you to a room where you can do the same." After he left, Mrs. Hennessy helped Delilah to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor, where her trunk was delivered by one of the ranch hands. The older woman clucked sympathetically over Delilah's soaked wedding dress, but said nothing about its significance. "Dinner's at 7, she said as she left. "Though no one would think less of you for taking a tray in your room tonight after what you've been through." Alone in the room, Delilah slowly unpacked her meager belongings, including the letters from Thomas that had led her across the country. Each one had painted a picture of a man who valued education, appreciated her literary references, and promised a partnership of equals. She should have been suspicious when he asked detailed questions about her father's business ventures in his later correspondence. A knock at the door pulled her from these thoughts. Opening it, she found Vaughn standing there, now dressed in clean, dry clothes, his dark hair still damp. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you need." "I do, thank you. Your hospitality is overwhelming." He shifted his weight slightly, revealing a hint of discomfort beneath his composed exterior. "I should tell you that Wellington's ranch borders our land to the north. If you'd prefer arrangements elsewhere, I'd understand." Delilah squared her shoulders. "I won't be chased away by a man who couldn't even reject me to my face, unless my presence causes difficulties for you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not in the least. In fact, there might be some satisfaction in the knowledge that you're under our roof rather than his." "Is there bad blood between your families?" she asked. "Let's just say Thomas Wellington and I have different opinions on how to treat people," Vaughn replied. His father was a good man, but since his passing last year, Thomas has shown his true colors. "I see," Delilah said, though she suspected there was more to the story. Vaughn cleared his throat. "Will you join us for dinner? The men would be honored by your company, though I understand if you'd prefer solitude tonight." Something in his steady gaze made Delilah straighten her spine. She had traveled too far and endured too much to hide away in a bedroom. "I would be delighted to join you for dinner, Vaughn, thank you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. 7 o'clock then. With a slight bow, he departed, leaving Delilah with an unexpected flutter in her chest. That evening, dressed in her second-best gown, she couldn't bear to look at the wedding dress. Delilah joined the household for dinner. Besides Vaughn and Mrs. Hennessy, there were 3 ranch hands who ate at the main house. Miguel, a skilled Mexican horseman, Jeremiah, an older man with a silver beard, and Luke, barely 20 with freckles across his nose. The conversation flowed easily, carefully steered away from her circumstances. Instead, they told stories of ranch life, cattle drives, and the upcoming summer fair in Laramie. Delilah found herself laughing for the first time in days, particularly at Miguel's animated tale of a stubborn mule that refused to cross a tiny stream, but would happily ford a raging river. Throughout the meal, she felt Vaughn's eyes on her occasionally, his expression thoughtful. When she caught his gaze, he didn't look away but offered a warm smile that reached his eyes. After dinner, as the men moved to the porch to smoke, Mrs. Hennessy pulled Delilah aside. "That's the first time I've seen Vaughn smile properly in months," she said. "Whatever storm brought you here, girl, it might have been a blessing in disguise." Delilah slept better that night than she had since leaving Pennsylvania, lulled by the distant sound of rain on the roof and the knowledge that, for tonight at least, she was safe. The next morning brought clear skies and a decision to make. Over breakfast, Vaughn explained her options. "The stage runs through Laramie twice a week. If you wish to return east, I can arrange passage for you," he said, watching her carefully. "Or if you prefer to try your luck elsewhere in Wyoming, I know of respectable boarding houses in both Cheyenne and Laramie." Delilah considered her nearly empty purse. The journey west had consumed most of her savings. "I'm afraid I can't afford to travel much farther," she admitted. "And I have nothing to return to in Pennsylvania," Vaughn nodded as if he'd expected this. "There's a third option," he said. "Mrs. Hennessy mentioned you're educated. The schoolhouse in Ember Creek, that's the small town about 6 miles south, has been without a teacher since Miss Porter married last Christmas. It's not much, but it comes with a small house and the children are eager to learn." Hope sparked in Delilah's chest. "I was a teacher's assistant before I left Pennsylvania. Do you think they would consider me?" "I serve on the town council," Vaughn said. "I'd be happy to introduce you to Mayor Wilson this afternoon if you'd like." "I would be most grateful," Delilah replied, trying to contain her excitement. Teaching had been her passion before Thomas's letters had painted a different future. Perhaps this was a second chance. True to his word, Vaughn drove Delilah to Ember Creek that afternoon. The small town consisted of one main street with various establishments: general store, blacksmith, saloon, church, and the small schoolhouse at the far end with its attached teacher's residence. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, was delighted to meet a potential teacher and even more impressed by Delilah's credentials. By the end of the hour, she was provisionally hired, pending approval from the other council members, which Vaughn assured her was a formality. As they walked back to the wagon, Delilah felt lighter than she had in months. "Thank you," she said, impulsively touching Vaughn's arm. "You've been extraordinarily kind to a complete stranger." His eyes softened as they met hers. "You stopped being a stranger the moment you accepted my coat in that storm, Delilah." Something in his tone made her heart skip a beat, but before she could respond, A commotion from the saloon interrupted them. A man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. Delilah froze as she recognized Thomas Wellington. He spotted them immediately, his bleary eyes narrowing. "Well, if it isn't the mighty Vaughn Xavier," he slurred, taking an unsteady step forward. "And my mail-order bride who wasn't worth the postage." His eyes raked over Delilah with disdain. Delilah felt Vaughn stiffen beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Wellington," she acknowledged coolly, "I see you found consolation for your disappointment." Thomas sneered. "Found out your daddy was broke before you arrived. Dodged that bullet, didn't I?" "The only thing you dodged was the opportunity to marry a woman far better than you deserve," Vaughn said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now apologize to Miss Rawlings." Thomas laughed unpleasantly. "Or what, Xavier? You'll beat me like you did when we were boys. Some things never change." "And some men never grow up," Vaughn replied evenly. "Miss Rawlings is under my protection now. I suggest you remember that. Under your protection." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. "Already replacing me in her affections, Xavier, or just her bed?" Vaughn moved so quickly that Delilah barely saw it happen. One moment Thomas was leering at them, the next he was sprawled in the dirt, blood trickling from his lip where Vaughn's fist had connected. "Insult Miss Rawlings again," Vaughn said quietly, standing over him, "and a bloody lip will be the least of your worries." Thomas scrambled to his feet, hatred blazing in his eyes. "This isn't over, Xavier. That piece of land may be tied up in court, but I'll get it and everything else you care about." His gaze flicked to Delilah, the threat implicit. "Get on your horse and ride home, Thomas," Vaughn said, "before you say something you'll truly regret." For a tense moment, Delilah thought Thomas might lunge at Vaughn, but instead he spat on the ground and stumbled toward the hitching post where his horse waited. "Are you all right?" Vaughn asked softly when Thomas had ridden away. Delilah realized she was trembling. "Yes," she managed. "Though I'm beginning to understand why you weren't surprised to find me abandoned in a storm." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Thomas Wellington has been squandering his father's legacy since the day the old man died. He's desperate for money and thought you were bringing a sizable dowry." He hesitated. "There's a water rights dispute between our ranches. He thinks my father forged old Henry Wellington's signature on a deed. It's nonsense, but he's contesting it in court." "I see," Delilah said quietly. "He mentioned you fought as boys." A flush crept up Vaughn's neck. "When we were 16, I caught him tormenting a young Mexican boy who worked at their ranch. I broke his nose." His eyes met hers, unapologetic. "I'd do it again." In that moment, Delilah realized how completely different the two men were, one who saw people as means to an end, the other who defended those who couldn't defend themselves. "Thank you for standing up for me," she said softly. "Always," he replied, the single word carrying a weight of promise that both frightened and thrilled her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur as Delilah settled into her new life. The teacher's cottage was small but charming, with a garden that had been neglected but showed promise. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, and preparations for the school term kept her busy. Vaughn rode into town frequently, ostensibly on ranch business, but he always found time to check on her progress. Sometimes he brought supplies, curtain material Mrs. Hennessy thought she might like, or books from the ranch library for her classroom. Other times he simply offered his strength, helping move furniture or repair a sagging shelf. They fell into an easy friendship, talking for hours about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they held. Delilah learned that Vaughn had attended university in Boston before returning to help his father run the ranch. He spoke 4 languages and had a passion for astronomy that had him building a small observatory on a hill behind the ranch house. "You could have done anything," she remarked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching fireflies dance in the growing dusk. "Why return to Wyoming?" "This land is in my blood," he answered simply. "The city has its charms, but I never felt at home there like I do under these skies." She understood. Despite her initial circumstances, Delilah had fallen in love with Wyoming, its vast skies, rugged beauty, and the sense of possibility that hung in the air like a tangible thing. The first day of school arrived, and with it, 17 eager pupils ranging from 5 to 15 years of age. Delilah found herself thoroughly enjoying the challenge of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously, though by the end of the day, she was exhausted. She was erasing the chalkboard when a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Turning, she found Vaughn standing there, hat in hand, a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "I thought your first day deserved a celebration," he said, offering the flowers with a smile that made her heart flutter. "They're beautiful," she said, accepting them with a blush. "How did you know wildflowers are my favorite?" "You stop to look at them every time we ride past that meadow by Cottonwood Creek," he replied, and the fact that he'd noticed such a detail made Delilah's breath catch. "Would you care to join me for dinner?" she asked impulsively. "It's nothing fancy, just a stew I started this morning, but there's plenty." The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant in Delilah's memory. They talked and laughed as the shadows lengthened, and when Vaughn finally rose to leave, there was reluctance in both their movements. At the door, he paused. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening," he said. "Would you do me the honor of attending with me, Delilah?" The formal way he asked, as if it mattered greatly to him, warmed her from the inside out. "I would be delighted, Vaughn." His smile was like sunrise. "Until Saturday, then." He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Delilah to press her hands to her heated cheeks and wonder at the rapid beating of her heart. Saturday's social was a lively affair, with most of Ember Creek in attendance. Delilah wore her best dress, a blue cotton that matched her eyes, and felt a surge of pleasure at the appreciation in Vaughn's gaze when he arrived to escort her. They danced and mingled, Vaughn proudly introducing her to everyone as our new schoolteacher. The way he said, "our" made it clear he considered her part of the community now, not just a visitor passing through. As the evening progressed, they stepped outside for some air. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright in the clear Wyoming sky. "I've never seen so many stars," Delilah murmured, tilting her head back to take in the spectacle. "They've always been there," Vaughn said softly. "Sometimes we just need to look up to see them." She glanced at him, sensing he wasn't just talking about stars. His eyes were on her, not the sky, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "Delilah," he began, then hesitated. "I know you came here with certain expectations that were cruelly disappointed. I wouldn't presume to." "Vaughn," she interrupted gently. "The disappointment fades a little more each day, and I'm beginning to think the storm that stranded me was the best thing that could have happened." Hope bloomed in his eyes. "May I write to you? Properly, I mean, I'd like to court you, Delilah, if you're willing." The formal request, so respectful of her recent heartbreak, touched her deeply. "I would like that very much." His smile was radiant as he offered his arm to escort her back inside. The courtship that followed was everything her correspondence with Thomas wasn't. Instead of flowery promises and vague plans, Vaughn was steady and present. He brought her books they discussed over picnic lunches, taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare he gifted her, and introduced her to his favorite stargazing spots. In turn, Delilah shared her dreams for the school, her love of poetry, and gradually, the painful story of her family's fall from prosperity after her father's death, and her desperate hope that Thomas's proposal would provide security. "I was naive," she admitted one evening as they sat by a small campfire, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "I believed what I wanted to believe." "There's no shame in hoping," Vaughn said, taking her hand, "only in giving up hope after disappointment." As summer faded into autumn, their feelings deepened. The first time Vaughn kissed her, beneath an ancient oak tree with leaves turning to flame above them, Delilah knew with certainty that what she felt for him was entirely different from what she had imagined she felt for Thomas. This was real, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and a connection that strengthened daily. When Vaughn spoke of the future, it wasn't with grand, empty promises but with practical plans that always included her wishes and dreams alongside his own. The only shadow on their happiness was Thomas Wellington, who made his resentment known whenever their paths crossed. He spread rumors about Delilah in town, suggesting she was a fortune hunter who had set her sights on the Xavier wealth after being rejected by him. Most townspeople ignored the slander, having formed their own opinions of the kind, dedicated schoolteacher. But Thomas's spite took a darker turn when Delilah's cottage was vandalized one night while she attended a school board meeting. She returned to find windows broken and hateful words painted on her door. Vaughn, furious, wanted to confront Thomas immediately, but Delilah urged caution. "We have no proof it was him," she insisted, though they both knew the truth. "I won't have you living in fear," Vaughn said, his jaw set in determination. "Stay at the ranch until we sort this out." Delilah shook her head. "If I run away, he wins. I won't be driven from my home or my students." In the end, they compromised. Miguel, Vaughn's most trusted ranch hand, moved into a small room at the back of the schoolhouse temporarily, and Vaughn arranged for the town's men to take turns keeping watch at night. The incident had an unexpected consequence. It united the community even more firmly behind Delilah. Mothers brought food, fathers repaired the damage, and children presented her with hand-picked bouquets and drawings to replace the ones destroyed in the vandalism. "See," she told Vaughn as they surveyed the restored cottage, "there's more good than evil in this world if we look for it." He gazed at her with such tenderness that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "You amaze me, Delilah Rawlings. Most people would be bitter after everything you've endured, but you still see the best in people." "Not all people," she corrected with a small smile. "I have no illusions about Thomas Wellington, but I refuse to let his darkness dim my light." As winter approached, bringing with it the first snowfall, Vaughn's father returned from an extended business trip to Cheyenne. Maxwell Xavier was an imposing figure, tall like his son but with silver threading his dark hair and a more weathered countenance. He insisted on hosting a dinner to meet the woman his son couldn't stop talking about, and Delilah found herself nervous as Vaughn drove her to Triple Creek Ranch that evening. "What if he doesn't approve of me?" she asked, twisting her gloved hands in her lap. Vaughn smiled, reaching over to still her nervous movement by covering her hands with one of his. "He'll adore you, and even if he didn't, which is impossible, it wouldn't change how I feel." Maxwell Xavier did indeed approve, welcoming Delilah warmly and engaging her in conversation throughout dinner. After the meal, he invited her into his study while Vaughn spoke with the foreman about a matter regarding the cattle. "My son has excellent taste," Maxwell said, pouring her a small glass of sherry. "In many things, but especially in you, Miss Rawlings." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," she replied, warming under his kind gaze that was so like his son's. "I understand Thomas Wellington has been causing trouble," he continued, his expression hardening slightly. "That family dispute over water rights has been settled, by the way. The judge ruled in our favor yesterday the deed was legitimate. Thomas will have to find another way to save his failing ranch." Delilah nodded, relieved that at least one source of tension was resolved. "I hope he accepts the decision gracefully." Maxwell's skeptical look suggested he thought this unlikely, but he changed the subject. "Vaughn tells me you've done wonders with the school. The children adore you." "Teaching brings me great joy," she admitted. "I feel I've found my purpose here." "And my son, does he factor into that purpose?" Maxwell asked directly, though his tone remained gentle. Delilah met his gaze squarely. "Your son has shown me what true character looks like, Mr. Xavier. He's the finest man I've ever known. I care for him deeply." The older man nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I've never seen him happier than he's been these past months." He leaned forward slightly. "He asked my permission to give you my late wife's ring. I was delighted to grant it." Delilah's breath caught, her heart suddenly racing. "I wasn't supposed to tell you that," Maxwell said with a wink, so please act surprised when the time comes." Before she could respond, Vaughn returned, giving them both suspicious looks when he found them smiling conspiratorially. "What have you two been discussing in my absence?" he asked. "Just getting to know your young lady," Maxwell replied innocently. "I was telling her about your tendency to sleepwalk as a child. Remember when we found you in the barn trying to saddle a cow?" Vaughn groaned while Delilah laughed. The moment of revelation kept secret between her and the elder Xavier. The first major snowstorm of the season hit Wyoming in early December, paralyzing the region under a thick blanket of white. School was canceled for 3 days as the blizzard raged, and Delilah found herself confined to her cottage, grateful for the well-stocked woodpile and pantry that Vaughn had insisted on preparing. On the 4th day, as she was beginning to worry about her dwindling supplies, she heard the sound of horses outside. Rushing to the window, she saw Vaughn dismounting from his horse, leading a pack-horse laden with supplies. She flung open the door, heedless of the cold. "Vaughn." "You shouldn't have risked the journey?" His face, red from cold, broke into a relieved smile at the sight of her. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he said, stamping snow from his boots before stepping inside. "Or blizzards, apparently." After unloading the supplies, food, firewood, and mail that had been held at the town post office, they sat before her fire, warming their hands around cups of hot chocolate. "I was worried about you," Vaughn admitted. "The pass between here and the ranch was nearly impassable." "You could have been stranded or worse," Delilah scolded gently. "I had enough supplies for another day or two," he shook his head. "Another storm's coming tonight, might last 3 days according to Jeremiah's knee, and it's never wrong." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps I should stay in town." "At the hotel, of course," he added quickly. Delilah bit her lip, considering. Propriety suggested she should insist he return to the ranch or, at minimum, accept his plan to stay at the hotel. But the thought of him making that dangerous journey again. "The cottage has a second bedroom," she said finally. "It's small, but I've been using it for storage. It would be improper, but given the circumstances, I would be honored to accept your hospitality," Vaughn said formally, though his eyes danced with something warmer. "And I promise to behave as the perfect gentleman." They spent that evening preparing for the approaching storm, moving furniture to clear the small second bedroom and making sure windows were properly sealed against drafts. The work was companionable, punctuated by easy conversation and occasional laughter. As predicted, the second storm arrived that night, howling around the cottage like a living thing. Delilah found it strangely comforting to know Vaughn was just across the hall, his presence a bulwark against not just the physical storm, but the lingering emotional one from her earlier ordeal. In the morning, they awoke to a transformed world. Snow had drifted against the cottage, nearly covering the windows on the north side. Ember Creek was effectively cut off from surrounding areas, creating a strange, peaceful isolation. Those 3 days of snowbound seclusion became precious to Delilah. They read aloud to each other, played chess, baked bread with the last of her flour, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. In the evenings, Vaughn told stories of his travels, painting such vivid pictures with his words that Delilah felt she'd seen Paris and Rome herself. On the 3rd night, as they sat before the fire, Vaughn suddenly stood and retrieved something from his coat pocket. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, returning to kneel before her chair. "I'm beginning to think there's no such thing as a perfect moment, just perfect certainty." Delilah's heart thundered in her chest as he opened a small velvet box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Delilah Rawlings," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "When I found you alone in that storm, I thought I was rescuing you. I didn't realize you were rescuing me from a life half-lived, a heart only partially awakened. You've brought light and purpose and joy to my days. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Yes, yes, with all my heart." Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't express. When they finally separated, breathless, Delilah laughed softly. "Your father told me about the ring, you know, but I still managed to be surprised." Vaughn groaned. "That old scoundrel, did he tell you it was my grandmother's and then my mother's?" "No," she said softly, admiring how the sapphire caught the firelight. "But that makes it even more precious." They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the Wyoming hills and the promise of new beginnings hung in the air. The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath the same oak tree where they'd shared their first kiss. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers and cowboys from miles around. Delilah wore a simple white dress adorned with blue ribbon that matched her eyes and the sapphire on her finger. Vaughn couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on his father's arm, Maxwell having insisted on the honor of giving her away. Thomas Wellington was nowhere to be seen. After losing the water rights dispute, he had sunk deeper into debt and drink, eventually selling his failing ranch to an investor from Chicago and departing Wyoming altogether. The townspeople considered it good riddance, though Delilah sometimes wondered if he might have been different had life taught him better lessons early on. As Vaughn and Delilah exchanged their vows beneath the oak's spreading branches, she thought of that stormy day when fate had stranded her between destinations. How lost she had felt, how abandoned, and how a stranger's simple act of kindness covering her with his coat had changed everything. "I promise to shelter you in every storm life brings," Vaughn said as part of his vows, a reference that brought tears to her eyes and smiles to those who knew their story. "Just as I did the day we met." Later, at the reception held at Triple Creek Ranch, Maxwell raised a toast to the newlyweds. "To my son and new daughter," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "May your love be as vast as Wyoming skies and as enduring as the mountains." As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Vaughn pulled Delilah away from the celebration for a moment of privacy. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood in the shadow of the barn. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning into him. "When I think of how differently things might have turned out." "I prefer to think it couldn't have gone any other way," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Some things are simply meant to be. Like a bride stranded in a storm," she asked with a smile. "And a cowboy with an extra coat," he finished, bending to kiss her beneath the Wyoming stars that had witnessed their beginning and now blessed their future. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Delilah continued teaching until their first child was born, a daughter they named Hope, in honor of what had sustained Delilah through her darkest hours. A son followed 2 years later, Maxwell James, named for his grandfather who doted shamelessly on both children. Triple Creek Ranch prospered under Vaughn's management, eventually becoming one of the largest and most respected cattle operations in the territory. When statehood came to Wyoming in 1890, Vaughn was among those invited to the capital's celebrations, recognized for his contributions to the region's development. But for Delilah, their greatest achievement was the life they built together, a partnership of equals, founded on respect and deepened by a love that grew richer with each passing season. Often, during Wyoming's spectacular sunsets, they would sit together on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard where their wedding reception had been held. In those quiet moments, Delilah would sometimes think of the frightened young woman who had sat alone in a storm, believing her future destroyed. How wrong she had been. The storm that had seemed like an ending had actually been the beginning of a love story written not in letters sent across the country, but in daily acts of kindness, respect, and devotion. And when occasional storms still came, as they inevitably did in life as in Wyoming, Vaughn was always there, ready to cover her with his protection, his name, and his unwavering love.